This presentation is an attempt to analyze the development of micro-armour figure gaming rules, with the objective of trying to develop some basic design guidelines which game designers should consider when creating rules. My personal holy grail is to identify a simple, fun and quick game system which allows a meaningful game in a 3-hour period. This is common in the world of board gaming but is not common in the world of micro-armour. Micro-armour figure gaming rules can be broken down by the scale used for an element, or base. The first set of rules I will cover are those which use a scale of 1 squad, or 1 vehicle, per element, or base. This scale is the most common, both in the beginning of the modern era of the hobby and today. It should be noted that when I use the term micro-armour rules I am also referring to rules designed for 20mm, 15mm, 6mm and 3mm figures. In most cases if a game uses an element scale of 1 squad or vehicle, the game scale is battalion, or to be more exact 2 companies with supporting formations. To have a game which lasts within a day you need to keep the total number of elements down to 100, or 50 per side, or equivalent. As a company is about 20 to 25 elements our limit is 2 companies per side. While not as significant this rules which use this scale normally employs combat units which are platoon size. While most rules do not have any specific rules for, what I call, combat units, most players keep their elements into platoon-sized units. In some cases the rules employ platoon headquarters, which would require players to keep platoons together. But this is not common. Finally the headquarters, in most cases the lowest ranked headquarters will be company level, of which 2 will be deployed, and a battalion headquarters as the highest ranked headquarters. This lists many of the squad scale micro-armour rules which were published in the last 50 years. There were very few revolutionary innovations in the 50 years this list covers. The first real innovation was the move from a simultaneous sequence of play to a sequential sequence of play. From that point the steady trend was increased complexity and detail until 2002, when Flames of War rules were published. Flames of War went back to a simple, quick play game system, which proved very popular. The list on the left are rules published in the US, with those on the right published in the UK, with Flames of War being counted as a UK set of rules. The one interesting trend is that, apart from the GHQ set of rules, the US stopped publishing rules by the early 1980s, with the last version of Angrif being the last published. In the UK, while being later to the table than the US, have maintained a steady stream of rules right up to the 2010s. I am uncertain why this is the case. I suspect most US players went to the next scale up or the US players began to use UK published rules, but this is a guess. My gaming career mirrored this with me leaving squad scale games about the 1970s and moving to higher scale rules. Saying this, I have a high degree of certainty that Flames of War and Team Yankee are popular in the US. Angrif may have been the first set of modern micro-armour rules ever published. It was first published in 1968 and later revised and expanded in 1972 and 1982, by R. Zimmerman and D. Myers. Apart from being the first set of published rules, the sequence of play was a major innovation, attempting to duplicate simultaneous movement into a sequential sequence of play. As with many early rules, there was a major focus on gun specification and armor thickness. These rules were designed for HO scale. Fast Rules is a set of rules developed by Mike Reese and Leon Tucker, and published as a 24-page pamphlet in 1970, by the Armored Operations Society, an affiliate of the IFW. Guidon Games made a second printing in 1972. I have minimal information concerning these rules, but as it came out shortly after Angrif, it's safe to say it used a similar scale. As for the game system, this is unknown, but was possibly very similar to Tractics. Tractics was the successor to Fast Rules and developed by Mike Reese and Leon Tucker, with contributions by Gary Gygax. The first edition was designed for 20mm scale figures, but by the second printing it was catering to 6mm scale figures as well. We can say these rules were the first to cater for micro-armour figures, and the rules proved popular. This set of rules used an umpire, which was a trend which was beginning about now, especially in the US. While in principle the idea of having an umpire was good, in practice it was not popular, as one player was forced to be an umpire instead of playing. In the UK, the first set of popular micro-armour figure gaming rules was WRG Armour and Infantry, 1925 to 1950, published in 1973. These rules did away with umpires and simplified the sequence of play. While reasonably detailed, it was a simple set of rules which proved very popular. Like many rules from this company, they were terse, which did make them difficult to learn, but the payoff was a small set of rules which could be easily referenced. These rules stimulated the creation of a great deal of supporting material, such as army lists. As it provided a points system, these rules were also used for competitions, although scenario quality varied a great deal. Panzer War was published before the second edition of Tactics by TSR. I lack any detail about these rules. With the second edition of Tactics and lack of supporting material, it failed to develop, and no second edition or follow-up material eventuated. It's interesting to note that Brian Bloom, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson were all involved in the formation of TSR, which was publishing Dungeons and Dragons. It's safe to assume that these rules and Tactics and Fast rules were all part of a close-knit ecosystem. Cambrai to Sinai, another set of UK rules, moved the detail and complexity bar to new levels. The sheer detail proved popular, although playing a game was slow and rarely was there a result. This was a trend which was repeated a great deal in the UK, and with some sets of rules in the US. While to experienced gamers this detail was attractive, in practice the rules never proved popular from a game-playing point of view. For a short period it was considered an alternative to WRG rules. Combat Commander was the US answer to Cambrai to Sinai, and it moved the detail and complexity bar even further. From a modern warfare point of view, the detail was impressive, and I still vividly remember trying to use long rod penetrators, without really understanding what they were. Experienced players flocked to these rules, but after trying to learn them many times and failing, I am uncertain how many games were actually played. Good on the bookshelf but not useful for an actual game. In 1979, a major rewrite of the WRG rules was published, specifically for modern conflicts, called War Games Rules for Armored Warfare 1950 to 1985. This edition proved very popular due to its focus on modern warfare. The other rules available for this period were too complex to be playable, and these rules filled the gap beautifully. As with the earlier edition, a large amount of supporting material was published for these rules, and they were often used in competitions. I personally ran several. The sequence of play had become more complex, but apart from that the only innovation was that they were a simple and playable set of rules which could allow players to refight modern conflicts. In 1979 Kampfgruppen was published, however I lack a copy and have no information about these rules. Based on the quality they looked like club rules and did not appear to gain any traction. In 1983 Challenger was published, which proved one of the most playable of the very complex game system rules. Pushing the detail and complexity envelope further than any other set of rules, it was just playable. Having used these rules many times, I was forced to simply ignore a host of weapons systems, such as aircraft and helicopters, in order to make it playable. A game took an entire day to complete, or about twice the time of WRG's rules. Its sheer detail was very attractive, and a large amount of supporting material was published for it. Its complexity was a turn-off for new players, so the main audience was existing WRG players. Ian Shaw, along with Bruce Rhea Taylor, provided a lot of supporting material for the WRG rules. Like Bruce, Ian decided to create his own set of rules. While more complex than WRG, they were simpler than Challenger and focused on World War II. There was no revolutionary ideas in them, but they were well written and structured. I am uncertain how popular they were, but suspect they were mostly purchased by experienced players who wanted more than WRG could provide. Bruce Rhea Taylor came out with a World War II version of his Challenger rules, called Firefly. As with Challenger, these were very complex, but among those who liked complexity they were very popular. For those players experienced with Challenger they were easy to get into, but for other players less friendly. As with most of the game systems developed by Bruce, when he passed away they tended to fade away. With Bruce driving the development of new content, the combination of complexity and lack of supporting content resulted in their eventual demise. The only short-term exception was Challenger. There was a distinct evolutionary process occurring in the UK, with WRG players moving to Challenger. While Challenger proved popular, the last version was less than popular, and Ian Clark and Mike Jones decided to develop their own set of rules which, according to the designers, were designed to overcome issues with Challenger. The result was a free set of rules becoming available in 1997 called Battle Group. The final version of WRG rules were also perceived as being problematic, and many remaining players of these rules gravitated to Battle Group. Mein Panzer is a very interesting set of rules from the US, which uses a rather advanced sequence of play. Each player activates a platoon and executes its action, followed by the opposing player doing the same until all platoons have been activated. The non-phasing player can conduct opportunity fire, so both players are constantly involved as the game progresses. The fire combat system is nice and simple, with a die roll to determine if a hit is achieved and another die roll to determine the effect of the hit. This is a very standard fire combat system, so represents minimal innovation. However, there is a focus on simplification which would assist in playability. After looking at Firefly and Battle Group, this is a real stab at the playability issue and seems to achieve its objectives. While my investigation is minimal, I really liked many aspects of these rules. The only downside is, while 6 minutes a game turn is reasonable and represents the state of the art at this point in time, it does not lend itself to a highly fluid and mobile game. Flames of War and Blitzkrieg Commander provide a much more fluid game, but with a less advanced sequence of play. Schwer Company, designed by Troy Ritter, is another attempt at creating a more playable set of rules at this scale. I must admit not being aware of these rules until many years after they were first published. They seem to have a loyal, if small, following. They use a rather aesthetically pleasing quick reference card system, but with the classic issue that players need to keep their element types count down. While the scale would imply a game of battalion size is possible, the recommendation is each side should consist of a company, or 20 elements. Never having played these rules, this makes me think there must be a reasonable effort in playing a game, as this would represent a very small game using most other rules. The sequence of play attempts to simulate simultaneous movement by flipping activities between the two players during the impulse phase. However, unlike other sequences of play which use this type of system, each player has a limited, but variable, choice of what he can do in each sub-phase. It's not a bad system and I can see some benefits in this, but this could be why the element total needs to be kept low. The rest of the sequence of play is typical. One area which does represent a major step forward is the ability of elements to fire twice, in lieu of movement. The game system also uses action points, which need to be expended in order to conduct an action in the impulse phase. This is not a unique system, but is a good way of reflecting troop quality and experience. As Flames of War came out in 2002, I suspect they took all the limelight and these rules were never as popular as they could have been. Flames of War, by Phil Yates, represents the most significant revolution in the development of squad-level micro-armor rules since Angriff. While primarily designed for 15mm scale figures, I still class it as a micro-armour set of rules. In terms of mechanics, there was nothing revolutionary, instead it was the package as a whole which was revolutionary. It was purely focused on playability, rather than attempting to duplicate history. This represents a 180-degree flip on the standard trend of greater complexity and detail, and proved to be a resounding success. Apart from its ease of play, it was supported by a large body of material. This includes scenarios, army lists and detailed points systems. This allowed for highly competitive play, another secret to its success. Battlefront World War II is an attempt to increase playability by the use of cards, and I must admit they do a good job. Each player has a card for each element type, which provides everything required to use that element type. While not a game mechanic feature, this is a feature which does enhance play. The issue with this system is if there are too many different element types, a player is overwhelmed with cards and the benefits quickly become a negative. The sequence of play is a basic I go you go system, with fire, move, fire and close combat. The fire combat system uses a differential system, and many other basic mechanics are standard and familiar. The major focus is on simplicity, which, like Flames of War, was almost certainly a reaction to the incredible complexity of rules designed prior. These rules have a lot of gloss and are very nice, but I must admit I rarely ever see them being used. I suspect when they came out in 2002, Flames of War, and to a lesser extent Warhammer World War II, was getting all the attention. Blitzkrieg Commander, based on GW War Master by Rick Priestley, has achieved a certain level of success. The quality of the rules are high, and this would appeal to the experienced gamers, who are not that obsessed with minor technical detail. The game system, while more complex than Flames of War, is far more playable than Battle Group, Firefly and Challenger. These rules may have been the first of a new trend, going back to a more playable game system while still retaining reasonable accuracy. In the 2009 second edition, each element represents a squad, by default, but in the 2010 third edition, each element represents a platoon, by default. In both versions you can play the game using either scale, but the element scale focus had clearly changed. The standard GHQ squad level rules is called Micro Squad the Game, World War II, which GHQ now provide at no cost. These are very professionally produced with good supporting documentation. The game system is detailed, but playable. This represents another attempt by the 6mm community to come out with a set of rules to mimic the popularity of Flames of War. While currently not popular, with the game turn having an unusual scale for modern rules, nonetheless it is a good set of rules. I suspect the market is saturated and new rules in this area have a hard time getting traction. The simple end is dominated by Flames of War while the complex end is dominated by Battle Group. There are other rules not covered here which directly competes with this set, Crossfire from memory. Unless a new set of rules offers something really new and innovative, it will not be adopted by the figure gaming community. These rules were developed using a basic game system I created for a number of other sets of rules, using the lessons learned from my analysis of figure gaming rules. Originally I wanted to update the older WRG armor and infantry rules for World War II, but one quickly discovered this has little benefit considering the large number of good rules at this scale. The gap these rules are designed to fill was related to the game turn scale. Most rules at this scale cover a period so short, little meaningful movement is possible. Skirmish scale does not have this issue, but once we are commanding one or two companies, it was hard to achieve anything within the real-time game length possible for most rules. Currently only force mixes from 1939 are provided, and I will create others in the future, although the game system is designed to allow players to game anything up to 2015 if they create their own scenarios. My only comment is these rules offer a very different experience to most squad scale rules, which many players may be uncomfortable with. Put simply, a lot of movement occurs, which can be off-putting. As I designed these rules, I am not going to provide an comment on whether they are any good or not, but I did enjoy the test games I conducted. While certainly not covering all the rules which have been published in the last 50 years, the rules covered here provide us with a good cross-section and allows us to determine what game design trends were at work. While a host of minor detailed rules were introduced over this period, my main focus is on underlying game system and packaging. The main development was in the area of sequence of play, fire combat system, complexity and completeness. The sequence of play system generally fell into one of two types: sequential movement in both types and simultaneous fire in one and sequential fire in the other. There was a lot of minor structural differences, such as separate close combat phases, artillery phases, aircraft phases and alternative fire and move to reflect ATGW, overwatch and normal direct fire, but these are not structural differences. Either system could be complex or simple, and there were advantages and disadvantages for both. No real sequence of play system revolution occurred in the period from Angriff to today. Once the move from simultaneous sequence of play to sequential sequence of play occurred, only minor details differed. Most of the fire combat rules covered use a simple process of determining if a hit is achieved, which can involve observation, and the effect of a hit. The real major change was the introduction of a save dice roll. In the older rules, the firer threw a dice to hit and then spun a dice to penetrate. With the save throw concept, the defender spins the save throw. A simple idea, but it was very effective on many levels. Flames of War used this system, however I am certain it was borrowed from other, unrelated, set of fantasy rules. The early rules were reasonably playable, but still focused on technical detail and accuracy. Because the detail was kept to a manageable level, the result was a very playable set of rules, such as the early WRG rules. This moved quickly to rules which were so complex they lacked playability. Flames of War changed the focus to pure playability, and this won the day. At this scale, the main focus needs to be playability, something most rules designers understood but found difficult to implement. The other critical factor is completeness. Creating the rules is only a small part of providing a complete product or solution. A host of supporting material needs to be created in order to allow players to quickly assemble an army and play a game. The early WRG rules achieved this because of the work done by Bruce Rhea Taylor and Ian Shaw in creating army lists, equipment lists and scenarios. Today the IO Group site provides players with an extensive up-to-date army list for WRG rules, which also supports Battle Group. This could be a reason why Battle Group and Flames of War still run conventions today. On a smaller scale, Zimmerman and D. Myers did the same for Angriff. Another interesting development, or may I say alternating trend, was the way the games were set up. Early rules seemed to focus on historical battles. These were very simple, but they often not accurate, and there was minimal focus on points systems and competition play. Many rules recommend large playing areas for best play, while I am uncertain how often this occurred due to logistic issues. The big group game seemed to be promoted a great deal in these rules, which limited their utility. Then the hobby moved to a points system, in order to facilitate competitions and play balance. WRG seemed to be a main proponent of this trend, possibly because of their experience with ancient rules and competitions. As a result, a lot of detailed scenario books were published in the UK, and this trend continued up to Battle Group, and even the Flames of War rules used it. These changes were all trends, and either system can be viable. However, in all these systems a major problem occurred. When players wanted a game, they all wanted to attack with their prized armor. The result was many games becoming meeting engagements. At best, a scenario may provide one player with slightly more forces or variable reinforcements. This resulted in many games having minimal movement. Often I used to see games being played in competitions, and after 3 hours when I returned, nothing seemed to change. Flames of War, being very much a beer and pretzels set of rules, overcome this slightly by allowing for very rapid and volatile play and provided reasonable scenarios. The key was scenarios, either historical or universal, with one side attacking with 150% to 200% superiority against the other. If both players want to attack, then reinforcements could arrive at the half point to allow the battle to swing the other way. However, at this scale this suggestion is difficult to implement. Flames of War, in particular, was a set of rules designed to work with reasonable universal scenarios, and this is an important game design trend which contributed to its success. In conclusion, the main points which result in a set of rules being popular can be summed up in these 5 points. Playability, ease of learning, 3 to 6 hour game duration, supporting army lists and equipment lists and scenarios. While not essential, a points system drives many of these success criteria, so is a special success criteria itself. Other less critical, but still important factor, is the structure and professionalism of the rules print, or PDF file, as well as usability. This concludes part 1 of my presentation on micro-armour game system design. Part 2 will cover the next scale up, which is platoon scale.